Hello and welcome to our 2036 presidential election coverage. Tonight, we are a few steps further into the primary season after the crucial Super Tuesday primaries. Now, let's get right into some polling. Starting off with the Democrats, very little has changed. The only difference in polling is that Joe Kennedy III has dropped from 16 points to 15 points, which now ties him with Ruben Gallego. Gallego, an interesting candidate as he won the Nevada primary in an upset, but failed to win a single Super Tuesday primary. He's hoping to win a few of the bigger contests coming up to establish himself as a credible candidate. And for the Republican primary, pretty much the same, Garcia leading with Youngkin and Bush tied for second place at 18%, and Maria Salazar remains at 15% in fourth place. Meanwhile, Kristen Nunu, who's been hoping to break out of the Northeast and win a few more primaries across the country, he's currently in fifth place at 12%. Sean Duffy, who's had a few big wins in Super Tuesday, is in sixth place with 10%, which is an increase. And here's the current primary map. Of course, nothing has changed. Andy Beshear with a 110 delegate lead over Michelle Wu. 108 delegate lead over Michelle Wu. And on the Republican side, George P. Bush remains in the lead, 315 delegates to Garcia's 288. And now we move into three crucial primaries in three pretty large states: Arizona, Florida, and Illinois. If we break down a few of the potential candidates' options here, well, let's take a look at their strategies. First of all, Ruben Gallego and Maria Salazar, as mentioned earlier, haven't won any Super Tuesday primaries, meaning that they need a big win to revitalize their campaigns. Both of them have home states up, Arizona for Gallego and Florida for Salazar, and they both want to win those respective states, Arizona and Florida. They have most of their bases in those states. For example, those states both have very high Hispanic populations. Meanwhile, the frontrunners for each party, Andy Beshear and Mike Garcia, have different strategies. Andy Beshear is hoping to win in Illinois and Florida, and he's a long shot chance in Arizona, though it's pretty unlikely being Gallego's home state. Meanwhile, Garcia has a solid chance in Arizona, Florida, and is hoping to maybe pull off a long shot one in Illinois, similar to Beshear. Glenn Youngkin, the second place, hoping to win in Illinois, potentially Florida, and George P. Bush, who's tied for second place, is hoping to win in Illinois and potentially Florida, as it is a southern state. And that pretty much wraps it up. Let's check out our results as the polls have closed. And we can project that in Arizona, Ruben Gallego will win in an easy victory with 55% of the vote, far ahead of Andy Beshear, only at 20%. Beshear will win a single county, the home of Tucson, while Gallego will do very well across the state as he is the governor and rather popular. Meanwhile, on the GOP side, Mike Garcia will win with a solid 10-point margin over Maria Salazar, who will win many counties across the state except for a few that Salazar will take, and he actually wins in Maricopa County, home of Phoenix, which Glenn Youngkin and George Bush were both hoping to contest, and use that county's high population to potentially even win the state or get a good showing in delegates. However, this is not to be, as Garcia did carry it along with the entire state. And now Florida, a very big win for Andy Beshear. He will narrowly edge out Ruben Gallego by around 50,000 votes, winning in the majority of the counties across the state, including a few areas like Hillsborough and Jacksonville. Ruben Gallego will also win many majority Hispanic or plurality Hispanic counties, doing very well with minorities. Joe Kennedy will do well in moderate suburban areas, while Josh Stein will do well in the more medium, moderate towns, and Michelle Wu is doing well mostly in metro and won the Tallahassee area counties. Meanwhile, on the GOP side, Maria Salazar, it is her home state, so she will win a decently large victory of 45%. This is actually smaller than expected. If you look at Arizona, Ruben Gallego won over 50% of the vote in his home state, but Salazar wasn't able to cross 50%, only at 45%. Of course, that is pretty respectable, but not great. Mike Garcia will come in second, despite not winning any counties, as he came second to Salazar in many of the more Hispanic, higher population areas. George P. Bush will win a lot of panhandle areas and come in around third or fourth place. Now in Illinois, a massive victory for Beshear, 54% to Michelle Wu's 22%. He'll win nearly every county in the state outside of the Chicago metro area, and a few smaller towns that Josh Stein will carry. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, a big victory for Sean Duffy. He has a very similar coalition to Andy Beshear. Many of the rural areas while the moderate suburban areas going to Glenn Youngkin, and Chicago going to Mike Garcia. And now the primary map. Andy Beshear has doubled his lead, pushing it up to 200 delegates. Meanwhile, Josh Stein remains in third place. About 40 delegates behind him is Joe Kennedy, and then Ruben Gallego. Meanwhile, on the GOP side, only 9 delegates separate George P. Bush and Mike Garcia. Meanwhile, Glenn Youngkin is about 40 delegates behind Mike Garcia. Behind him is Sean Duffy, now taking 4th place, and Maria Salazar in 5th place, and last is Chris Sununu. And Joe Kennedy has announced that he has dropped out after failing to win a single primary in those crucial 3, and only a few in the Northeast during Super Tuesday. After his lackluster performance, seemingly he was cursed after being the 2032 Democratic nominee for Vice President. After that very disastrous campaign, it seemed to have cursed his campaign, as I said before. He's now dropping out, and interestingly enough, endorsing Beshear, which might help a few more suburban voters join the Beshear campaign. In addition, Ruben Gallego has exited, and while he is more similar in ideology to Michelle Wu, he's backing Andy Beshear, interestingly enough. Beshear, who of course beat him in Florida, is definitely doing pretty well, especially with these 2 endorsements. On the GOP side, we have some interesting news. Chris Sununu will drop out and endorse Glenn Youngkin. He failed to win any primaries outside of the Northeast, and is endorsing the more moderate Glenn Youngkin as opposed to the more populist Mike Garcia. Meanwhile, Maria Salazar is dropping out in favor of the frontrunner Garcia. This is very big for him as he just fell into 2nd place, and this might help bring him back into 1st. And now we have some polls to Democratic primary. Beshear has a very big 10-point lead over Michelle Wu, and about 12 points behind Wu is Josh Stein. And now let's look at the polls for the upcoming primaries. In Wisconsin, it's pretty close given that the primary is only a few days away. However, we do expect most of the undecided to break for Beshear, given that his ideology fits pretty well with the more populist left-wing voters. Meanwhile, Michelle Wu is a few points behind him, and about 2 points behind her is Josh Stein. In Alaska, a very big lead for Andy Beshear, over 30% above Josh Stein, who's in 2nd place. And in Wyoming, 60 points for Beshear, no contest here, at least we expect based on the polling. And in Ohio, a crucial state. Many insiders on the campaign have told us that candidates who might not be doing very well are going to stake their campaigns on the Ohio primary, given that it's a very big state, and it will definitely be crucial to win for any candidate to continue going if they don't have a lot of momentum behind them. Currently, Beshear has a 30-point lead, though we do actually expect this to narrow up as we get closer to the primary. And now, Oregon is the only state that looks to be close, given that it has a very progressive area in Portland. But still, Andy Beshear has a 5-point lead over Michelle Wu, truly showing the momentum that he has. And now, on the Republican side, it is very close. Maria Salazar dropping out did give Garcia a boost. He's now 1 point ahead of George Bush. 2 points behind Bush is Youngkin, and 5 points behind him is Duffy. Duffy did gain about 5 points after his victory in Illinois. Not as much as he would have liked, but still pretty good, as he is on the rise. Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, Duffy's home state, he's doing very well in terms of polling. And then we can move on to the Alaska polls. Still, Duffy doing pretty well, about 10 points above Bush. And then in Wyoming, definitely Duffy's home territory, a very rural, more populous state, definitely good for him. And then in Ohio, a very, very tight race. As mentioned earlier, candidates might stake their campaigns on this primary, and it shows, as it is a very tightly contested race. The gap between the frontrunner, Sean Duffy, and George Bush, between last place, Mike Garcia, is only 4 points. That's pretty close, especially for a big primary like this. And now we have poll closings out of the state of Wisconsin. As you can see, a massive victory for Andy Beshear. Definitely more than polls expected. He has over 50% of the vote, winning all but 3 counties. Michelle Wu got a respectable 27% of the vote, winning Milwaukee. And Josh Stein won, of course, Green Bay and Kenosha, more moderate, medium-sized towns that he's been doing pretty well in recently. And now let's move over to the Republican side. A very easy victory for Sean Duffy, his home state. No need for a county map here, as he swept every county. And Youngkin's polls have been rising along with the economy. As you may know, their economy has been in a depression, but is starting to move out of it. As you will see soon, DeSantis' popularity personally is rising, and Youngkin is getting a lot of credit as the Secretary of the Treasury, given that that is where his position deals with. Now, Youngkin is doing a little better due to that fact. And now we move over to DeSantis' approval rating, which definitely is tied, as both Garcia, Youngkin, and Bush are all members of his administration. His approval was once negative in double digits, but now is in the single digits, as his approval rating improves with Republicans, Independents, and moderately Democrats. Now we are poll closings out of the state of Alaska, and we have a projection to make. Andy Beshear is a projected winner in the state of Alaska, no contest here. But what's interesting is that Glenn Youngkin is a projected winner. As we mentioned earlier, his polls are rising along with the economy, and that was true for Alaska. He managed to upset Sean Duffy and win with more moderate voters. Definitely not a big state, but a big win for Youngkin. And in Wyoming, let's check it out, the results as the polls have now closed. And no surprise here, Andy Beshear is the projected winner. And on the Republican side, Sean Duffy, still the projected winner. Even if Youngkin won in Alaska, the voters are not nearly as receptive to his moderate policies compared to Sean Duffy's populist ones. And now, here comes the big one, the state of Ohio. Now, let's break it down before we look at the poll closings and the eventual results. First of all, Andy Beshear has the lead on the Democratic side, but Michelle Wu and Josh Stein could potentially pull an upset or keep it close enough to continue in the running. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, Youngkin's had an upshoot in the polls, and if he wins this, it might cement him as the frontrunner or eventual nominee. Sean Duffy needs to win this state to continue on, as he is a little lacking in delegates. Though he's been winning more Midwestern primaries, he'll definitely need more bigger backers in order to win the nomination. Now, let's check out the results. Andy Beshear will win a massive 30-point victory, winning all but 3 counties in the state. He will win by just under 500,000 votes over Michelle Wu, and as you can see, Michelle Wu only winning the county that Columbus is in, meanwhile Josh Stein winning Franklin County, a more suburban county, and the city of Daytona. This is a very big win for Andy Beshear and will cement him as the likely nominee for the Democratic Party. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, Glenn Youngkin will narrowly edge out Sean Duffy. This is quite an interesting result. Duffy winning most of the rural areas. Youngkin doing well in the suburban areas and in the Cincinnati-Daytona area, and also a few areas up more on the border in Pennsylvania. Very, very interesting results here. George P. Bush winning a smattering of more rural counties, and Mike Garcia winning in Columbus. Definitely interesting results, and this will definitely cement Glenn Youngkin as a likely candidate for the nomination. Sean Duffy really needed a victory here, and he wasn't able to manifest it. And we now have a major projection to make. We can now project that Andy Beshear is the winner of the Democratic primary and will be the nominee to face whoever the Republican nominee or potential independent candidate in the general election. A big victory. He was denied the nomination in 2032, but has now won it as a popular candidate. And now let's check out the reason why. After their losses in Ohio, Michelle Wu and Josh Stein have left the race and are to support Andy Beshear. This means the Democratic Party will be united, and we'll see who Andy Beshear's VP pick will be. Michelle Wu is definitely a promising candidate given her more progressive policies will balance out his more conservative platform. Meanwhile, here's a Wikibox. You can expect a closer look in the future in a potential YouTube short, so stay tuned for that. Now let's move over to the Republican primary. Mike Garcia has taken the lead, and this is including endorsements, by the way. That is why Mike Garcia has the leads in Nevada and Florida. He has won 523 delegates, Youngkin taking second place at 486. Given that no candidates have endorsed George P. Bush, he's just under 400 and a distant third now. Sean Duffy only at 268, a very distant fourth. This might mean that Duffy's campaign is over, and we'll see if he endorses anyone. And Matthew McConaughey has hinted at a presidential bid in a recent speech. The governor of Texas is the best bet for the independents to get close to the White House, if that's even possible. He's pretty popular nationwide, and being an actor, he has very high name recognition and charisma. And now let's check out some polling maps. Andy Beshear would win a narrow victory over Sean Duffy by about 30 electoral votes. This is interesting. Duffy would actually do better in the Midwest, winning Pennsylvania and Montana and Alaska. Though Alaska is not technically in the Midwest, it still has a similar base of demographics compared to Pennsylvania and Michigan, just lacking the large cities. Anyway, enough talk, let's move into the next primary map, and that includes Matthew McConaughey. They actually wouldn't do very well with Sean Duffy in the mix, as Duffy would take a lot of the more populist voters, and beshear also has a limited appeal to those same types, the more left-leaning in economics. And let's move on to the next polling map with youngkin versus Andy Beshear. Youngkin would win Texas and Kansas, but lose Pennsylvania and Montana to Beshear, who is just under 300 electoral votes. Meanwhile, with Matthew McConaughey thrown in, it would be a pretty tight race getting thrown to the House. McConaughey would actually win the state of Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, and actually prevail in Wisconsin, Iowa, and Ohio. Very interesting. This might be the likely matchup, so as you're ready to see this happen in real life. Now in the Republican primary, it is tied between Glenn Youngkin and George P. Bush, both at 22%. Meanwhile, Mike Garcia only 1 point behind at 21%, and Sean Duffy just a point behind him at 20%. Truly a tight race. Now, I hope you all enjoyed this. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like and tell me what you thought in the comments, and subscribe for more videos like this. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.